Hey everyone. I'm sorry this is coming up a little bit later, but I think you're going to enjoy hopefully some of the features in this PowerPoint presentation. So what we're going to go over today in this flipped classroom relates to the reading that you did, which is about immigration, but it goes a little bit further and starts talking about more in detail for the immigrant experience. So as we move through this flipped classroom, I want you to think about some of these terms and be able to talk about them, use them in your writing, expect to see them in multiple choice questions, be familiar with them. So things like Ellis Island, tenements, ethnic enclaves, nativism, William Boss Tweed, Americanization, political machine, and the social gospel movement. And then I also want you to be considering as we move through this, some of these like big ideas and themes that we're going to kind of connect to things that we've already talked about in history class and things that we know will be coming down the pipeline. So the immigrant experience, we're going to really describe what it's like to be an immigrant in the late 1800s, early 1900s of America. And as we move through, we can make connections to earlier immigrant experiences that we've talked about in class, but also start connecting it to more of the modern day immigrant experience. Where are there similarities or differences? And then we're going to talk about how prejudice sits behind certain policies and politics, and how that influences a lot of the legislative and other political movements of this time period, but also we can make those connections to today. And then how do cities and housing factor into this idea of the American dream? I think that a lot of stuff we're going to see here in this unit, we can make a lot of connections to our summer reading book, Evicted, and start to see some of these similarities and how a lot of these things have been going on for a while. So I'm just trying to figure out how I get to the next slide. There we go. So I did not make this PowerPoint. This is from, I downloaded this and it's pretty cool. So they have like definitely some different features that I don't usually add, but this is introducing us to immigration and city life. So just to set the stage, this idea of being like we're immigrants, we're coming over, for the most part, we are coming in from, I don't know if you can see all that, but we're coming from China, we're coming from Northern and Western Europe. But then as we get into more of the early 1900s and away from the 1800s, we will start getting more from Southern and Eastern Europe as well. So we're going to have a lot of people entering the United States. And as you'll see here, between 1860 and 1910, the population of the U.S. almost tripled. And that's because we were going through a boom, right? We were moving west. There was more space. Our cities were being developed, as we'll talk about here. So we had more opportunities for new folks to come to our country. Sorry. Man, I am struggling here. Where is the next one? Sorry. Hold on. There we go. Great. So this kind of says what I was just talking about. You can see over here that they're in Northern Europe. Those were kind of the older immigrants. These are the people that we've had experience with coming before. It'll be our first wave of immigrants that weren't people coming from Great Britain area, or who were left over as kind of French expats, left over from the French and Indian War. But then we're going to also get some of these Southern and Eastern Europe folks, as well as more Asian immigrants than we've ever had before. So how did immigrants get here? Whether you were coming from Asia, whether you were coming from Europe, you came by steamships. So that was, when we go through some of these pictures, if any of you have ever seen the Titanic, you'll get an idea of, this will all seem kind of familiar to you. So you had to travel on the steamships. Obviously, there were no airplanes or anything, so steamships were the way to go. So you could either choose to come as a steerage passenger, which the vast majority of folks were. Those were the poorest who could not really afford these first and second class tickets. And they were also treated much more poorly than the first and second class immigrants. The first and second class folks who had tickets on those levels were able to go directly to New York City. No one had to vet them or figure out if they were okay to come in. If you were a steerage passenger, which the vast majority of folks were, you had to be processed at Ellis Island, which I think probably all of us have heard of. Located in New York City, it was an island that we'll talk about in a bit. So these are some images of what first class life was like. So like pretty fancy, right? You see a lot of velvet, you see a lot of fancy things. This was high class living. On the entire trip, you were up here, you were living well. But most of the immigrants were poor, so they traveled in the steerage. So the experience was bad. You were stuck, cramped all together. It was very crowded, very dark, very unsanitary. The only difference that a lot of people sometimes make between if they're trying to compare the steerage experience to that of the slave ships is that you at least were not chained and you were coming on your own accord. So there was a much more hopeful feel in these boats, but like the same kind of conditions of it being dark, crowded, unsanitary, way packed into the gills, no room to breathe. It was a very, very trying experience. So you can see here, really no room. It kind of looks like the Eagles parade, am I right? So the journey took about 16 days, and then you eventually landed in Ellis Island. You saw New York. So why were people coming over? Some of these are pretty obvious, I think, and some of them we can assume, right? So there was things like they just wanted a better life. America was booming. Like we had just finished the Civil War. We were back together. We were becoming much more modernized with industrialization in our cities. We had a lot to offer. So some people wanted to leave Europe, come here for a better life. Others wanted to come here, make some money, and then go home. They needed to make money in order to support their families who couldn't afford to make the trip, and they wanted to go back. That was the end goal. Others had to escape difficult situations. Either there was the Irish potato famine that had a huge wave of Irish immigrants coming over because there wasn't any food. Their entire crop source was destroyed and they were starving. So this seemed like the best option. That's actually how my ancestors ended up coming over and ending up in Philadelphia, was through the Irish potato famine. So they've been here for a while, but that was the ultimate motivation for them to leave Ireland. Other people wanted to leave because they weren't getting any land. There wasn't enough opportunity for them. Others, there was political and religious events that happened, or kind of like political discontentment that made people be like, hey, you know what? This is not safe for me and my family. I want to leave. So I want us to take a pause here, and I want you to take a minute and write down these two questions. I'm going to scroll down and see if you can see it. But based on this graph, which I'll move it back up so you can see, identify one situation in the United States that led to an increase of immigrants coming into the nation. But I also want you to see one situation in the United States that led to a decrease of immigrants coming into the nation. So if you go back up here and you see, and just focus in on that, on this graph, you'll start seeing that at different peaks and valleys are when the number of immigrants are coming into the U.S. And then the valleys are when not as many immigrants were coming into the U.S. So take a minute, pause the video, and try to figure out what were some events that led to more and more immigrants coming into the U.S. and what were the types of events that put a pause a bit on immigration, where we didn't get as many new folks. So take a pause and just restart the video once you're ready. Okay, so we are going to go to the next slide. I included this because I thought this was pretty cool. This shows you all the ancestries of Americans today, and so where they settled when they first arrived. So if you wanted to take a pause and look at this, it breaks it all down. So we have African American, the Eskimo, then we have Americans, which are pretty much people who were here all along. So maybe they were originally part of like the Revolution, and they have only ever referred to themselves in census questionnaires as Americans. American Indians, Dutch, English, Finnish, French, German, Hispanic/Spanish, Irish, Italian, Mexican, Norwegian, Puerto Rican, and then other. So this is kind of cool to see where the spread is, and also to see how a lot of people kind of stuck together. A lot of people with the same ancestry ends up in the same types of areas, the same types of environments, which we'll talk about in a very micro level way with the building of cities. So, like I said, Ellis Island was where all of these immigrants came in, who are at least the immigrants that were coming from Europe. So if you were a European immigrant, you were coming into Ellis Island. So Ellis Island, you may have seen it if you ever have driven into New York City. It is where the Statue of Liberty is. And so it's a small island in New York Harbor, and it served as the processing center for most immigrants after 1892. And over the course of from 1892 to 1924, about 17 million European immigrants passed through Ellis Island. So a lot of times, if you have European ancestors, they came through here. They were processed through here. And so you can see this is what a processing center looks like. They're waiting in line. They're waiting to get settled in, to be seen, to be evaluated, to see if they can come here and be residents of the U.S. And there were little kids. So this is a kid holding a suitcase, girl holding her doll. So in order to get through and to pass the processing center and to be able to get off Ellis Island and head into New York City, you have to pass inspection. So at this point, you were held for days at this immigration center. And the process included physical examination, so making sure that you were healthy, document checks, making sure you have the right paperwork to be able to come here, interviews, trying to see if you had any people here, trying to make sure that you were healthy and physically able enough to work, and that you had some sort of money or you knew someone here that could provide you money, so this way you weren't a burden to society. I think that we can all make some comparisons with this process to some of the processes going on right now on the border. I think we can be able to draw some of those. So start thinking about that and seeing how you can make some of that comparison. Here's just some more photos to kind of take us back. Ha! I thought that was pretty funny. The original photo bomber, this guy just smiling in the background. But trying to lighten it up a little bit. So again, just some more images so we can picture this a little bit better, what this actually looked like and felt like. Part of the physical examination, making sure you don't have lice, making sure that you're not like hiding anything that shouldn't be hidden in your hair, making sure your eyes look good, your whole system is good. Images, and just a little fun fact, that it's estimated that the ancestors of almost 1/2 of all the people living in the U.S. today pass through Ellis Island. And you can actually go visit there today. Now, remember we talked about how there were a lot of Asian immigrants coming over in this period? So they clearly would not have gone to Ellis Island in New York, right? They need to come to something on the West Coast. So at this point, you'll remember that we have California in possession. So San Francisco was the processing center. So they came through, so all the Asian immigrants, primarily Chinese, came through a place called Angel Island. Now, they were even more difficult to get through at Angel Island than they were at Ellis Island. There was very harsh questioning. They would stay much longer in much filthier buildings, waiting to see if they were even able to leave or if they would have to go back. So, we'll talk a little bit more about the Chinese immigrant experience when we get to some of the prejudicial policies that were created at this time. But for now, we've been to both processing centers. We've talked a little bit about the journeys and the reasons why immigrants would come to America. So let's go into New York City to use this as an example of what city life was like and what some of the immigrant experience was like. And we will actually continue the city piece in the second video.